Texas lawmakers now know when they'll be back to work at the Capitol, but big questions remain about what decisions they'll face in this special session and the lasting impact of the walkout that blocked priority bills. He's got star power, but could Matthew McConaughey really become our next governor?
If I were Matthew McConaughey, I'd look at those numbers and say, I got a shot.
New polling puts the spotlight on how Texas voters feel about Governor Abbott and who could be his biggest challengers in the campaign to come. A new problem for the state's foster care workers. Our investigators dig into why staff face a rising risk of assaults.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. This week, Governor Abbott set the date to bring lawmakers back to the Capitol. He announced that the special session will begin on July 8th. The governor did not reveal what issues would be on the agenda, but the measure to tighten voting rules in Texas is widely expected to be part of the call. The announcement came as Senate Republicans blocked the For the People Act. The federal voting rights legislation could have superseded state rules likely to pass in the special session. Special session announcement also comes as Governor Abbott prepares for a high-profile border visit. Former President Donald Trump will join the governor Wednesday for a security briefing at DPS regional headquarters in Weslaco. They'll also hold a town hall meeting in Edinburgh. For insight into what's next for the session and border policy, we turn to our reporter roundtable. We're joined by John Moritz, a correspondent for USA Today Network, and James Barragán, a politics reporter for the Texas Tribune. Welcome.
Hey, good to be here.
Good to be back in the studio.
Yeah, it's great to see you guys in person, right? Well, let's start with the border visit. Governor Abbott and former President Trump will head to the Rio Grande Valley on Wednesday. Why there versus other areas where, like El Paso, where Vice President Harris visited on Friday?
Well, I think what I've heard from lawmakers that I've talked to is that the real issues are at the Rio Grande Valley. And so if you want to get an understanding for the issues, the problems that there are in terms of controlling the flow of migration, Governor Abbott definitely thinks that they need to be down there in the Rio Grande Valley, and some lawmakers, including Democrats like Henry Cuellar, want to be down there. Now, Veronica Escobar and the vice president think differently. Escobar has said that she sees El Paso like an Ellis Island, and so there's a lot more resources there, and I think that's the difference there they want to show.
One of the interesting things is that they're not in Del Rio, which is where the ranches are, and where Governor Abbott likes to mention that there are, the ranches are under siege. So I found it a little bit curious that they're not going there, but perhaps the venue of Edinburgh, it's a larger town, closer to the airport. Maybe it's just more convenient. But I think the real action on the border is a little bit more up the river.
Yeah. Speaking of Governor Abbott, he has set the date for the special session. Election legislation is likely on the call. Is there any lingering, feelings that Democrats might walk out this time again? Could it happen, you think?
Who knows? I think that there are. I think that they would like to say that all options are on the table. But with the defunding of the legislature by Governor Abbott with his veto, I think it makes things very difficult for Democrats trying to do that, because then if they walk out and then their staff isn't paid and a bunch of other legislative staffers aren't paid, then it's on them. So I think it makes it a little bit more difficult.
There are very few tools left for the Democrat. One is in Washington, where federal legislation seems stalled. And absent a federal bill to override the state, they can't rely on that. There might be a court remedy that says, hey, the separation of powers does not let the governor just veto another constitutionally authorized branch of government. And should the court decide in the Democrats' favor, if they go that route, that would give them a tool. But that's still an outside shot.
Has anything like this ever happened before? Where there was a veto of an entire branch of government in the Texas government?
Not to my knowledge. I know there's been agencies that have been zeroed out over the years, but a constitutional branch of government, that's going to be a real test of the governor's power, because presumably if he could veto the legislative branch, he could veto the judiciary's branch. And conceivably, the legislature could zero out the executive branch. So we'll see how that plays out.
I actually did look into this, and this has never happened. There's not been a veto of the legislature's funding. It's unprecedented, and it does get into tricky situations like John is talking about. If the governor decides to defund the legislature, then the legislature could just then turn around and we get into this back and forth of just them defunding each other. That's why it's not advisable, but here we are, and so it's going to make it an interesting special session.
Yeah, I mean, how do you do a special session if there is the threat of maybe no staff being in the building?
There's certainly a threat, right? Certainly a threat. I think they are funded, though, through the special session. They're funded, I believe, through September 1st.
But there may be other special sessions down the road.
There definitely would.
If the Democrats choose to stall, walk out, or whatever without restoring that funding, there will be some hungry legislative staff.
And to your point, I mean, we know that we're coming back for a redistricting special session in the fall, September, October, right? And so the money will have run out by then. So how are we supposed to redistrict without the legislative staff that does this? And there are specific legislative agencies that provide a lot of the information for redistricting. So that is up in the air.
There is a legislative redistricting board.
It's not clear how that would work out.
It's right there. So.
All right, well, a lot to talk about. We're going to have you guys back, like part 2 of this. There's too much to discuss in one roundtable.
Good to be back.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Josh.
The announcement of the date of the special session came just before the release of a new poll about next year's race for governor. It shows Texans are divided on whether Governor Greg Abbott should be reelected next year. A Quinnipiac University poll released Wednesday shows 46% of registered voters say Abbott deserves to be reelected, but 48% say no. Those numbers aren't great, but the poll shows Abbott's doing better than some possible Democratic challengers. 41% of voters in the poll said they would like to see Beto O'Rourke run for governor. Matthew McConaughey, 41% say they'd like to see him run. But the percentage of Texas voters who have an unfavorable opinion of O'Rourke is more than double the number who don't like McConaughey. So what does the poll tell us about how the race this far out from the election is going? Our Will Dupree took a deeper dive into the results with the analyst who helped run the poll.
Looking at Governor Greg Abbott's reelection odds at this point, what did Texas voters say about him running for reelection next year?
It is not a slam dunk that the governor would be reelected if it happened right now. He's 46% want him reelected, 48% do not. So that's not a terrible number. But then you look at the younger guys that are lining up to run against him, not younger, not being that important necessarily, but who they are. And he might have an uphill fight. At least the early numbers tell us that.
Yeah, you all also polled about some of his recent policy proposals, particularly about this idea to build a wall along the border with Mexico here in Texas and have the state fund that. Where did that come out in the poll findings that you all just did?
There were two things. The governor wants to build a wall along the Texas border, and he also wants to arrest people crossing the border. Texans came down split on the idea of a wall, but we're far more hardball as far as making arrests and incarcerating people crossing the border. So it's not 100% backing on the wall at all.
Going back to the governor's race now, there are potential candidates that are going to maybe get on the ballot next year against Governor Abbott, namely Beto O'Rourke on the Democratic side, and then actor Matthew McConaughey. It's unclear exactly where or for what party he might run in the gubernatorial race. How did voters feel about Beto potentially getting in the race there?
Democrats overwhelmingly, 77% want Beto O'Rourke to run. He does slightly less well than McConaughey overall, as far as overall voters. He's 41% want him to run, 52% do not want him to run. McConaughey, on the other hand, is doing favorability numbers very close to what the governor's got right now, and is apparently a very tantalizing candidate, despite the fact no one quite knows what political party affiliation he is, but it's really remarkable.
To know that the results show that McConaughey is has same favorability or so of Governor Abbott, what does that tell you?
Well, it's an interesting state because, as you know, every election cycle we find it gets closer to purple and away from red. It's not a Democrat state at all, but it is moving in that direction. McConaughey is a native son, an unknown. He's got star power, and he wrote a best-selling book that's still topping the shelves. And let's not rule that that's important. And he's a breath of fresh air. The fact that the governor is a big supporter of Trump and possible possibly Trumpian policies may work against him, may work for him as well. But something is definitely going on with Matthew McConaughey here.
If you're Matthew McConaughey right now, how do you read those numbers?
Well, it'd be hard to imagine being Matthew McConaughey. It'd be fun. But
Right.
if I were Matthew McConaughey, I'd look at those numbers and say, I got a shot.
And if you're Governor Abbott, on the flip side, what do you think?
I think Governor Abbott is still solid, but he might have formidable opponents in certainly these two, Beto O'Rourke and Matthew McConaughey. This is another reason why we polled this. This is a gubernatorial race unlike any we've seen.
One Texan who was reportedly considering a run for governor now says he won't get in the race. This week, Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller announced he's running for re-election instead. He had positioned himself as a potential challenger to Abbott with sharp criticism of the governor's policies. One critic of the governor already launched his campaign. Former Dallas State Senator Don Huffines will challenge Abbott in the Republican primary. Huffines made the announcement last month. A troubled Texas foster care system showing increasing signs of stress. Our investigation looks at the rise in the number of fights happening at state offices. A new COVID variant on the rise in Texas.
In a matter of weeks, it will take over as the dominant circulating strain for the COVID infection.
It's more contagious and it's infecting younger people. What doctors say Texans need to be doing now. New progress to protect people in the military from crimes committed by fellow service members.
It's about all soldiers feeling safe on a military base.
But see why the Vanessa Guillen Act faces key opposition that could stall the bill.